Leaders, conversations with leaders for aspiring leaders. I am Brian Lass, and joining me today, an individual I'm all too happy to be here, admittedly somewhat reminding me of myself in that he has worn many hats at admittedly many successive levels above me. He is Brian Knowler, lived experience professional speaker and trainer on mental health leadership, veteran cop currently at the rank of staff sergeant, retired lawyer, coach, published author, even a TEDx speaker to his attribute as well, and PTSD survivor. And again, he is my guest. And as an aside, Brian, fantastic name. Thank you so kindly for being here.
Thank you. And I do appreciate the name very much. Great minds think alike, my friend.
Absolutely. Perfect. So I tell you what, I definitely want to relish really every second I have with you here. And admittingly, I'm sort of the most intrigued, not to say that, certainly your entire tenure today doesn't intrigue me, but the idea of this, leadership or training in regards to mental health leadership. And it's certainly a very intriguing lens that I'm all too happy to peel back the layers. And I know you have many, many great insights to share, not to mention how you arrived sort of where you are at present date. And with that being said, I certainly for myself am interested. I would imagine many people watching are certainly interested as far as the major succession of events or even roles for that matter that again find you arriving where you are present day. Maybe you can sort of walk us through this.
Sure, absolutely. So I began policing in 1999 in a small town in southwest Ontario. I moved services after about 2.5 years. And I actually found myself moving into a leadership spot fairly quickly as an acting platoon sergeant. I'd always been interested in leadership, even when I was a kid. Before I went to law school, my undergrad degree was history, and I primarily focused on, Canadian and military history. So I read a lot when I was a kid about, military campaigns, military leadership, world leaders. So it's always been a real fascinating area for me. So when I moved into that acting sergeant role, obviously it's a step towards, getting that role permanently. And one night I happened to be, it was a night, October 2004. I happened to be the closest officer to a call of a really, really bad crash between a minivan and a pickup. I was the first one there. And to make a very long story very short, the driver of the minivan who died, almost literally in my arms, was one of my, very, very good friends from university. We kind of gone through our undergrad together. It took me a couple minutes to recognize who he was just because of the darkness and the injuries. And when it hit me, I kind of shut down for a little bit before I, kind of bounced back and said, hey, you got a job to do here. Sure. But, Brian, I never processed that night properly. I never really faced the death of my buddy. I never really debriefed it, talked about it. It was definitely having an impact. In the background, it was eating away at me. Got promoted to sergeant for real about a year and a half later. That took my wife and my two very young kids to Northern Ontario. Within about a year and a half, I got promoted to staff sergeant. Yeah, thanks. In hindsight, probably too quickly, staff sergeant after 8 years of policing. I didn't really enjoy the journey. It was all about, the next rung of the ladder. Meanwhile, I have two very young kids at home that are growing, and my wife was a grade school principal. So a very busy family. And by about 2011, it was obvious that there were problems. We had grown, very distant as spouses. I was bubbling myself off in the garage with, alcohol was my coping mechanism, video games, internet, TV. And then finally in early 2012, there came a fateful night where during a conversation with my wife, the floodgates opened and I had that crash, physically, emotionally, mentally. And for the first time, in 7.5 years almost, I told someone the whole story, that being my wife. And finally, something's wrong. I need help. This isn't normal. And my wife, God bless her, she's grew up in a policing family. Her dad was a staff sergeant as well. Her sister's a police officer, so she knows the life. She knows the ins and outs, and she stuck with me when a lot of spouses wouldn't. God knows I gave her reason to. Literally the next day I started a program of treatment, and that led to eventually starting to, writing was a huge therapy for me. So that led to notes and notebooks all over the place, journals filled with thoughts, which turned into a book, which turned into getting asked to start speaking about PTSD. I think it took my doctor about 10 minutes to hear the story and go, "Oh yeah, you're dealing with chronic cumulative PTSD. Like, make no mistake about it." So that was January 2012. So just over 9 years. And then that led to really digging into it. And, like I said, I started sort of doing some speaking, training, and then after I published my first book, which is called On the Other Side of Broken, I got lots and lots of feedback from first responders who read it. And one of the overwhelming things, Brian, I kept hearing over and over was how important leadership was, or lack
Oh, for sure, for
of.
certain. Yeah.
Uh, it seemed to be it was almost black and white. There wasn't a lot of gray. Like, these veterans and first responders I was hearing from either had fantastic people, ahead of them who were, putting a hand down and saying, "Hey, let's do this together," or they had, people above them who were completely derailing their progress and were, huge impediments to their healing. So that got me thinking about, two or three super, super strong leaders I had on my recovery back. And that led to really digging into the topic and, interviewing a bunch more first responders, interviewing police chiefs and fire chiefs and retired military people, and finally putting it all together and realizing just how crucial a role leadership plays in today's workplace, especially in taking care of our team's mental health.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, I tell you what, first and foremost, I greatly appreciate you being so transparent about the whole thing because, I mean, obviously this idea of, lived experience and being able to share that with everyone who can benefit from it, for as far as I'm concerned, would be just about, just about anyone, especially in light of today's environment. First and foremost, I thank you so very kindly for that regard. Distinctively a lot to unpack there. So I'm going to maybe backtrack a bit and sort of address a couple things. And I may forget about some of them along the way. That tends to happen the more gray hair I get on my head. But you made an interesting point. I mean, talking about your policing journey, maybe first and foremost, and the idea of, you ended up in this acting sergeant role and inevitably sergeant, and then I guess realizing staff sergeant, what I guess in a civilianized term is considered management. And to your point, you felt maybe a bit. Sort of quick. So I guess what I'm wondering, I mean, when you make that sentiment maybe a bit quick after 8 years, was it just that you felt that you wanted to spend more time in the front lines, maybe spending more of, tactical thinking as opposed to strategic thinking, or what were your thoughts? I guess I'm just sort of curious where that sentiment comes from.
Well, I mentioned, growing up, I was really into the concept of leadership. I was a super driven kid. Like, I pushed myself hard through school. I pushed myself hard through university, through law school. While I was going to law school, I had two jobs, one of them being, bouncer at downtown Windsor.
Sure.
Um,
Where most
and
of us start, yeah, sure.
I, I just kept viewing, I was in this mindset that, hey, there's another rank, that's what's next. Um, so when I got promoted to sergeant, I had a fantastic group of officers I worked with. And like I said, now looking back, I wish I had spent more time on the ground with them. I was just viewing that next, like I said, that next brass ring, which in this case was staff sergeant. Um, Looking back now, absolutely. I feel like I pushed myself. I did. I wanted increased responsibility. I wanted to, get into a role of things like incident command and emergency management, and, move into a spot where, I wasn't just overseeing 12 or 15 officers. I was now overseeing, 80 some plus, civilian staff and buildings and fleets and everything else. Um, but yeah, if I, and actually, in a way, I did get a bit of a do-over, because I hit a point where I said, okay, I need to take a step back. So I actually walked back a rank, went back to sergeant,
Well,
went back on the road, back home in our hometown, for about about 4 or 5 years, and it was the best thing I could have done for my career. I felt like I had all that fun and all those things I missed when I wasn't, when I didn't have my head in the space of being a sergeant. So not everybody gets a do-over, and I did, and I felt like this time I was ready to move on, not pushing myself and forcing myself because there's another rank to go for it. Looking back now, and speaking to my therapists and doctors since, that's very typical of first responder with PTSD. Bury yourself in the work, give yourself a goal, put that mask on, and that's exactly what I was doing. Absolutely.
Interesting. So, totally to that effect, there's something to be said for someone who could truly take a step back, be conscious about the idea of, one foot backwards really instead of 1 foot forwards, because in many ways it may be one step backwards and then 12 steps forward. So certainly, to your praise, to be able to to rise to the occasion and do that absolutely speaks volumes. So certainly something to be not only celebrated but very commendable as well. Now that being said, and maybe shifting gears sort of a little bit to this idea of certainly to your credit, I know you are CEO and lead trainer with Knowler Consulting, named after, of course, the gentleman on the other side of my computer screen here, which I guess came back from January 2012, I believe it is, much in line with, of course, your journey to date. So this idea of mental health leadership and being a leader and trainer in this regard, I'm a little curious to try to unpack this a bit, how this would look and what even maybe a starting point would be, again, for everyone watching, people in perceivably leadership roles, or really not to preclude from those that lead from the front when you decide just to take care of those to the left and the right of you. I'm kind of curious where your sort of, I guess, starting preamble, if I can word it that way, sort of word it that way, would be when we start to talk about this idea of mental health leadership.
Sure. I just want to comment on one thing you said
Yeah.
about leading from the front and taking care of the people on either side of you. I'm sure you probably agree. Some of the best leaders I've ever met in my career are people who were absolutely happy where they were. They were happy going to calls, chasing taillights, however you want to put it. They had no aspiration to move into a formal rank structure, but they were the go-to in the office, right? They knew
Sure.
everyone, they knew everything. The people who, if you got them on with a new policy or plan or idea, you had a pretty good idea that was going to go over well with the rest of the troops. So
Absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think though sometimes those informal leadership networks get neglected, and not just in our world, and I think sort of the professional world in general. So to your question, I guess how I would start is just I started with sort of the basic theory that if you are putting yourself in a leadership role in the professional realm today, and whatever that may be, um, mental health issues are growing in scope and in severity, and I'm talking across the spectrum
For
from
certain.
simple quote unquote depression all the way up to psychosis and trauma and everything in between, burnout, compassion fatigue. Those are growing. Not only are they growing, but the willingness of people to engage about them is growing. So psychological injuries in the first responder world kind of used to be this kind of dirty little secret. It was under the rug, or
Of course.
in the shadows, whatever analogy you want to use. And now it can't be ignored. This is a societal issue that simply can't be ignored. Um, so what kind of led to all of it was like so after I talked to I talked to all those thought leaders and all those first responders, I started just writing down ideas, things that had impacted me from a leadership role that I did, mistakes I made, as well as feedback I got, like I said, from other first responders, and especially things that I remember sitting back and going, wow, that was something, this inspector, this superintendent, this, whatever, didn't have to say or do, but they did it. And now I feel better. I feel stronger. I feel like this is the right way I'm going here. And all those ideas just started flowing. And then they became a book. And then written from the premise of, if you want to lead, you need to think about these things. If and ideally, and I have some friends in the business world who still can't just roll their eyes when I say this, that, the best barometer of your organization is your people. How well are they? How healthy are they? How's their morale? It's not your bottom
Mhm.
line. It's not your stock price. It's not your IPO. That's usually about when my business friends go, okay, I'm good. I can't hear anymore.
Yeah,
This is
sure.
heresy.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh, but that's really as simple as it is, Brian, is that as a leader, you are responsible for that team in every sense. And it doesn't mean, constantly monitoring them and watching them and micromanaging
Of
them. It
course.
just means taking the idea of their mental health and wellness and balance into account when you're doing your day-to-day things.
Interesting, and a couple things that I want to sort of jump on here again before they escape my synapses here. So you talk about the idea of micromanagement, and to an interesting point, and I talk a lot about this leadership guru I like a lot named Simon Sinek. I'm not sure if it's this individual, but he talks a lot about how individuals, when you're sort of on the front line, so to speak. So I guess in the world of policing, you're a frontline patrol officer, let's just say, and your job is to just be very good at your job, and we'll give you all kinds of training courses on de-escalation, et cetera, et cetera. And your job is just to do your job very well. But to that effect, when you get promoted, the next run up, we sometimes maybe fall a bit short in that certainly the person plausibly got promoted because they were very good at what they were doing in the front line. But now they think that their job is just to tell the people at the front line how to do it their way, whereas that's certainly not what it is at all. It's not about being in charge, but taking care of those in your charge. So that's certainly a good point. So I almost want to just sort of examine that for a moment. Do you feel that, when, and again, speaking in the policing context, you sort of, are invited to take that first step to, let's say, intro level supervisory, that we are, and I use the term loosely, we are doing a good job of instilling leadership qualities or training people in these now supervisory roles to lead those in their charge?
I think it's getting better. I think traditionally, and I'm going back to, like I mentioned, my father-in-law was, very old school copper, right? He retired in 1995, so his heyday was 70s, 80s, and just thinking about stories from him and from my coach officer, other officers who I've met along the way, and for a long time it was all about your rule by fear, right? I have this rank.
Autocratic style, sure.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. And by the way, I love Simon Sinek stuff. I think he's dynamite.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was very much about, I'm a corporal, I'm a sergeant, I'm a staff sergeant. You are a constable. Therefore, what I say, I don't owe you an explanation. I don't owe you reasoning or logic. Just do it and shut the hell up. I think that style it's still around, but I don't think it has really very much credence, right? I mean, certainly leadership by authority is absolutely a tool in the toolbox. And sometimes it is your last resort where if you simply can't persuade someone through the force of your personality, there is a time and place where you might have to say, I'm
Yeah.
telling you to do this because we work in a hierarchical system. Um, but I think we are I think organizations are getting better at teaching that concept of leadership, and that it doesn't just mean, like you said, telling people how to do their job the way you would do it. It means broadening your horizons, maintaining perspective, reflecting on yourself as a leader, communicating properly with your team. Sometimes even, I mentioned that, kind of backtrack. Sometimes stopping, taking that step back, reevaluating, and going, okay, what do we got here? What tools, what resources can we put into play? What do you give me some suggestions, right? That's the kind of leadership I see growing now, and I think that that old school, really rank based, like I said, you do this because I tell you to. I think that is absolutely a dying breed.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
I've been
at
lucky.
least we're on the same page in that regard. So,
Yes. Yeah. I've been lucky. I've been asked a couple times to go to Ontario Police College and address the recruits, and the programming they're getting now on, mental health, psychological first aid, suicide prevention is a fantastic foundation for starting to build this next generation of leaders, I think, who will, hopefully, touch wood, uh, someone coming to them saying, "Hey, boss, I need this next block off, man. I've got this. It was a bad call. I can't shake it. and that will be just as acceptable as coming in going, you know what, I blew my shoulder out last night wrestling with that drunk on the side of the highway.
Absolutely.
So I think we're getting there. I think the issue is so pervasive now that police services would be, I would say negligent, but they would be very, bereft if they didn't address this
No,
with their upcoming leaders.
for certain. And sort of to that point, and latching on from that, you as well touch briefly on the idea of morale, and certainly wanting to address things, sort of attached to morale. And I guess what I'm getting at, and I've said this in many of my videos, certainly us as humans, we're social creatures. We respond or react to the environments we're put in. So, almost, starting to get on the idea of creating the applicable and appropriate environment, or even the culture. I know that terminology is used a lot, the workplace culture. And, when we start to talk about, from a mental health angle, maybe not necessarily to the extent of PTSD, but, the idea of someone absolutely dreading to go to work, what kind of toll is that going to take on their mental health? And again, another Simon Sinek quote he talks about in many of his speakings, the idea of, and I'm sure this is something maybe, Brian, and I can tell you I've related to this. You'll be at a table with some friends or colleagues, and one person will pipe up and say, I love my job, and the rest of them say, oh, you're so lucky. I mean, what kind of a world are we living in if that's the case, right? So I guess the point I'm getting at, wanting to address, from a leadership perspective, the idea of creating this environment where people can naturally work at their absolute best, feel sort of inspired, motivated, ensure we're creating morale, from this leadership angle. I guess first and foremost, is this something, and we may or may not agree on this, I'm certain we probably do, but is this something that absolutely more so rests on the shoulders of leadership, or people in perceived leadership roles? And what are some of your thoughts about things that maybe people watching can start to put into play to try and endeavor to best get it right?
Yeah, I absolutely think that is a huge keystone for anybody who wants to put themselves in a leadership position, right? Is all those things you mentioned, morale, making people want to come to work, right? I mean, I'll be very honest. I've been in that position where I sat in a parking lot looking at my workplace and going, I can't get out of the car. I just, and then that, that train of events eventually led to me taking some time off and doing a bit more healing. But it's a horrible feeling, right? If, I just heard something the other day on a leadership group that I facilitate, and there were one of the students in the group talking about a coworker who was so terrified almost of going to work that she would get physically sick when she was putting her uniform on in the morning. She would throw up at home, and then she'd drive to work, and then she'd throw up in the locker room because
Well,
she had this horrible, just this horrible relationship with her supervisor, and it was just constant friction. And that's the first response world is tough enough. The job we do is tough enough without adding you know, dreading going into the office because you don't know what mood your supervisor is going to
no,
be
for
in.
certain.
So I
Yeah,
think absolutely it's incumbent on people in leadership roles to want to create that place where people want to come to work. And if you do the things that I've found all the best leaders in my life do, you create that space. You listen to your people. Uh, and the really cool thing is, if you build those bridges on the day-to-day things, when something really big happens, when things really go south, guess what? You've already built up that trust. You've already built that relationship, and they're going to trust you when the big call comes in, or when the big crash comes in, or there's something tragic happens in the office, and the eyes are on you now to provide the leadership, right? Um, know your people, communicate with your people, go to bat
sure.
for them. Don't. And it's funny because these are things that seem so logical to me now, but I can still see sometimes when I'm, addressing, first responder agencies or frontline service agencies, some people are still, kind of give me the puppy dog with like, don't throw your team under the bus. Take the hit for them when something goes wrong. Vouch for them,
Yeah,
try and get training for them. Make sure they have good equipment. Make sure they have the tools to do their job.
no, for sure.
Um, just it, and they're not big earth-shattering
No,
things. But like I said, if you do the little things, when the big things come to it, it's going to be a lot easier. I mean, anybody can navigate the ship when the seas are calm, right? It's when you're in the eye of the storm, you need to be able to take that helm and really give it.
For sure. And even to that, to, sort of that point, I mean, much from the opposite of this idea of autocratic leadership, which we both talked about, certainly on its way out, if not completely already. I mean, you go full scope and we talk about the idea of servant leadership, or rather, I'm not viewing you as someone who works for me, but rather, now I work for you. What can I do for you? Is anything I can do for you to help you best do your job? You're legitimately taking a care and vested interest in these people who, again, are in your charge. So, absolutely. Very, very, very insightful. Well, I'll tell you what, Brian, you've been so very generous with your time here today. Obviously, a lot of very, very insightful points about your journey, about leadership, and really everything between. So, sort of I guess the quintessential parting words in most of my videos, certainly an invitation. And as I always say, I know there's absolutely no magic pill to offer someone who wants to, become a proficient learn leadership, or even rise in successive ranks. But maybe what you've found to be beneficial for yourself that you can offer as any sort of advice or insights for those who are striving to, realize these perceivable, I guess we could call, leadership roles, and certainly, endeavor to climb the rungs and the ladders, realize more responsibility. Any sort of parting words, insights, or advice maybe you'd offer to someone in that such caveat?
Sure, absolutely. I am a firm believer in, two things: surrounding yourself with leaders, and surrounding yourself with kind of a and Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill back in the 1920s coined the term mastermind, right? So, surround yourself with a mastermind group. Surround yourself with other people who love being leaders and are enthusiastic about it, and feed off each other. The other thing is, find those people that are on your team, and nurture their leadership, mentor them, coach them, let them start to get involved in decision making, let them start to get more involved in that leadership world, because that's where the next generation is going to come from. There's nothing better for, and I'll finish with a very quick story.
Sure.
I happened to be at our headquarters a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the latest promotional list had come out, and there was an officer who had gotten promoted to, I believe, inspector. And someone asked me, "Hey, wasn't that one of your sergeants when you were a staff sergeant?" And I said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And this person asked me, "Well, are you mad that they outrank you now?" I said, "No, absolutely not." I said, "I can look back and remember, that officer's first day as a sergeant, and walking them through things and taking calls at 2 or 3 in the morning from them. No, I'm happy that I had a hand in that officer's progress. And, it's funny that, like, the night before I had messaged them and said, 'Hey, congratulations. I saw the thing in orders.' No, I think one of the best things a leader can see as an accomplishment is someone who they mentored has now gone up and exceeded what they've done. That's a legacy, right? You've left a legacy by passing on some of your wisdom, lessons, however you want to put it, to someone else who took it, ran with it, made it their own, and then they're now blazing their own trail. So if there's going to be anything I would suggest, it would surround yourself with the people that you want to be.
Absolutely, and to that effect, I would say, although admittedly we didn't touch on this too much in the in our chat here today, but absolutely a big part of leadership, the idea of creating other leaders. Certainly being this figure that you want to see other people rise to the occasion as well, and not try to I guess excel in your own career by keeping the other person down. That's certainly not very indicative of leadership. So excellent point, certainly a very insightful point to finish on as well. But Brian Knowler, again, I thank you ever so kindly for joining here today. It's a pleasure to put a face to the name and all the like here for everyone else to see at the same time. And for anyone watching who are interested in Brian's endeavors, or perhaps reaching out, again, it's Knowler Consulting. You can look him up on LinkedIn. I will perhaps place your credentials as well in the video as it's posted, so people can reach out to you, attach you in that way. So again, I thank you so very kindly for your time, and as well, of course, for each and every single one of you for watching, and all the excellent comments for all the videos to date. We always appreciate you tuning in. I am Brian Last. This is Calling All Leaders. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you so kindly.